journeying to a place called Sukkot, and then it seems to be clearly called Sukkot. Then he builds them Sukkot, and then they say, "Oh, that's why they called it Sukkot." But of course, it was already called Sukkot in the opening. But what's the reason? What's the possible the context here? Everybody knows. So Jacob and Esau have met one another, right? They've had their.
This is where Jacob ghosts Esau.
He ghosts Esau
because Esau says, "I'll meet you." I forget where, and then Jacob says, "Sure, I'll meet you there." And then instead, he goes somewhere else.
Right.
It's actually horrifying because they just had this big forgiveness moment.
Right.
So it's like, in the light of that, what do you make of the forgiveness moment? Because Jacob deceives him yet again.
Right.
And this is after the wrestling with the angel and what does anything mean at this moment?
Well, certainly it's interesting for all of us because the second instance that we're about to look at, which comes from this morning's unique Torah reading, is in the context also of forgiveness and of rapprochement. Rapprochement. I like to say that. Rapprochement.
It's in the context. So well.
Thank you. So French.
Well.
And so
I'm so impressed. Do you speak French?
I do.
No.
I know. A little bit. So the rapprochement of God and the Jewish people is also the second context for the second usage of the phrase. So that's interesting. It's also interesting because, as we'll see in a moment, there's something very protective about this journey for Jacob. So clearly, even though all of us as moderns and postmoderns and look back and think that Jacob is, this horrible moment, but clearly there was something about the relationship between Jacob and Esau, which was too much maybe for Jacob. There's something about it being too much, and so they needed to go to Sukkot, and Sukkot becomes a kind of protective place. It's interesting. Its usage here is it's right after a very dangerous situation has been averted, and
so both scenes are about the dangers of intimacy.
Exactly, it's a danger of intimacy here that's invited. Like there's something about the connection between Jacob and Esau that he can't really, for whatever reasons, for good or for bad, Jacob is not completely transformed, or he has a residue of resentment, a resentment residue. Resentment is also French, resentment. To continue to feel over and over, ressentir. And so let's actually move into, you want to go into...
Ronnie's getting a big kick out of this. Right. Our resident professor of French literature.
A Francophile. She's like, what's going on over there?
There's no word called.
Oh, my goodness.
There's no word out.
Okay. So shall we? So we look at and when we open up again, maybe we'll have some other ideas about the nature of Sukkot here. Up to maybe here's, but it's.
Well, I want to say one thing, which is not only about the dangers of intimacy and trying to connect, but it's also about presence and how fleeting presence is. And Sukkot feels like, to me, it's all about presence, right? After all these huge theological holidays, we kind of just dwell in Sukkot and it's like an immersive experience.
So read that back into the first instance of Sukkot. So Yaakov now is leaving this terrifying and remarkable experience of reconnection with his brother, who had vowed to murder him, right? He's now, in some sense, reconciled or whatever it is. He made a promise that he's not going to keep. And he journeys to Sukkot, and the Torah tells us that he builds for himself and his house. Right, so he gets a house. I never actually looked at this, believe it or not. He builds for himself a house, but he builds a sukkah for his mikneh.
Yeah, these are animal
huts. Right.
Animal huts, right? The most basic of all structures or shelters.
But so he builds himself a house. So he wants some stability, but he builds cover for his property. Okay, so I guess Sukkot is the first stop on the journey away from intimacy here, or away from the possibility of an intimacy almost had, or an intimacy much desired, or an intimacy that might have been too much. And it's okay. So let's move into the fascinating source that for today's Torah reading.
Great.
Yeah. Source 2.
Okay. Source 2. Vayomer Moshe el Adonai. So Moses says to the Hevapeh, or to God, Re'eh, see, ata omer elai, ha'el ta'am hazeh. You say to me, right? So first of all, I love that Moshe opens up this speech, and it's like really an active initiative here, right? Like, look, God, like here's the story. This is what's going on. You say to me, Ha'el ha'am ha'al et ha'am hazeh, take up this nation, va'ata, and you, va'ata lo hodatani et asher tishlach imi. Sorry, we didn't screen share. I forgot to screen share. You know what? Actually, Ari, can you screen share?
Sure, I can screen share.
That'd be great. Thank you.
So I was here, nice to see you. We thought about doing today's reading in the Sukkah, to do open book in Sukkah, the open Sukkah.
Difficult to make it hybrid.
It would have been hybrid challenged.
Hybrid challenge. Okay, great. Yeah, you were in the right place. Excellent. Okay, scroll a little bit down and maybe make things a little smaller so we can see more of the text.
For some reason, it's not letting me make it smaller in this one.
Okay, that's fine. So can you keep following as I'm reading?
Absolutely.
Okay, v'ata hodatani et asher tishlach imi. So now you have not let me know who you're sending with me, right? So who's going along on this journey with me? V'ata amarta yidaticha b'shem v'gam matzata chen be'enai. So, and now you said that you know me by name. So Moshe is saying this, you know me by name, and I have found favor in your eyes. So I'm a special guy to you, God, right? So that's the beginning of the kind of argument. I'm a special guy. And given that I'm a special guy, so next verse, and now if I have favor in your eyes, if I have found favor in your eyes, well, Moshe just said that he found favor in God's eyes. So if I found favor in your eyes, show me or let me know your ways. So look that picking up from Rabbi David, I color-coded different theme words. So eyes are in purple, knowledge is in blue, and seeing is in orange, okay? So let me know your ways. And let me know by whose account.
But I will know you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I will know
You're right.
you.
And I will know you in order that I can find favor in your eyes. And see or, understand that your nation is this great nation. Right. Sorry, no, that your nation.
This great nation is yours.
Thank you. This great nation is yours. Vayomar. So I'm gonna go back here, 14. Panaye lechu. My face will go with you. That's what God said. But notice that the reference have dropped out, which is interesting because I think for the rest of the conversation, they're gone. And I will make things easier for you. Okay, 15. Vayomer Elah. And he said to him, so this is.
Too late. Lower down. Oh, she's in the middle.
Moshe is saying to God. So God just said, I will send my face with you, right? But then Moshe says, if your face doesn't go with us or your presence doesn't go with us, don't take us up from this, right? Don't, let's stop this journey right now if your presence doesn't go with us. But God just said, my presence will go with you. So what's the story? So in my studying with Sharon this morning, I think the key to that question is in the next verse. Efo ki matzati chen beinecha ani ba'amecha halo b'lechtecha imanu. And so how will I know that I have found favor in your eyes, I and your nation? So Moshe wants it to be not only about the love affair that God has with him specifically, but also about the nation, right? Moshe is not only concerned with himself, but he's being a great leader here. And about hello b'lechtecha imanu v'niflinu ani v'amcha mikol ha'am asher al pnei ha'adama. Okay. unless you go in the lead, do not make us leave this place. For how shall it be known that your people have gained your favor unless you go with us, that we may be distinguished, your people and I, from every people on the face of the earth. So Moshe is reminding God of this great project, right, between God and the Israelites, not only about God and Moshe. Okay, so now we're in Yud Zayin 17. Vayomer Adonai Moshe, okay, the reference are back. 17, God says to Moshe, Gam et hadavar hazeh asher dibarta e'aseh. And also this thing that you said, I will do. Ki matzati chen be'inai, ki matzata chen be'inai, ve'edacha b'shem. Because you have found favor in my eyes, and I will let you know, I'm sorry, and you are known to me by your name. So Moshe, God is still focusing on Moshe as a single person. God's not mentioning the nation, which is fascinating, right? Because Moshe in his rhetoric is trying to introduce God's relationship with the nation. So Moshe says then, Vayomar, and he says, Har'eni na kvodecha, show me your glory. And God says, Vayomer, Ani avir et kol tvi al panecha, I will pass all my wares, all my goodness before your face. The karati b'shem Adonai lepanecha, and I will call the name of Yud Hey Vav Hey before you. V'chanoti et asher achon, v'richamti et asher arachem, and I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious to, and I will be compassionate to whom I will be compassionate to. So that's interesting. Is God responding here, do you think, saying, Moshe, I don't know about the whole nation, but I'll be gracious to whoever I want to be gracious to. I never read it that way, but it's an interesting.
Like I'll tell you who I. You know,
yeah, exactly.
Like
don't try to force my hand.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Vayomer lo tuchal le'ot panai. So God says, you cannot see my face. Ki lo yor'ani hadam b'chai, because a person cannot see, or a human being cannot see my face and live. So, while I was studying with Rabbi Sharon this morning, she was saying, like, there's such a dance of intimacy here, right? It's like what you can see, what I can't see, what Moshe keeps pushing for more intimacy, and God's sort of limiting it. Okay, so now
there's somebody, but like just the focus on the face is really profoundly obvious. It's almost like the face here of the text is so obvious. It shows its face because it's all about the face. It even uses the phrase face when it comes to the face of the earth. The repetition of the word panim over and over again is just so, and lefanecha, in front of you, that's also in your face.
That's so also face, yeah.
There's a lot of in your face. And so al panecha, lefanecha, et panai, and that also, of course, is very much intertextually related to the Jacob wrestling with the angel.
Just thinking, I never thought about the two scenes together.
Yeah, the two scenes together are very connected through the face. The interface between these two texts is literally on the face that the angel and Jacob are wrestling, right? They're wrestling in the dark. They don't see each other, and then the sun comes up, right? And that's when he receives his name, and then he calls the place that I saw the name is called the place of I saw God's face.
Right, but then in the encounter between Jacob and Esau, who is it that says, I see your face as if it's the face of God? Does Esau say that to Jacob, or Jacob says that to Esau?
That's, I think, when Jacob says it to Esau.
Okay.
So then he says to him, you can't see my face, but I will kol tuvi al panecha. In other words, you, Moshe, I will avir kol tuvi al panecha. Like your face will receive something of kavod, but my face you won't see. Right?
God's very much in control here, right?
Of course.
Avir, right?
Right.
I mean, of course.
Right. Yeah, God's
I'm saying
in control.
It's reflected in the language.
Yes.
I will pass by my stuff before your face.
Right.
Right. So, like some measure of me, I am showing to you.
Yeah, and
I will tell you what I'm going to show you.
But what's also intertextual is also interesting because he says to him, "Lo tuchal." Where's the other "lo tuchal"? The lo tuchal is also in the Jacob wrestling with the angel. Is like he says to him, "Lo tuchal," right? He says, "You can't overcome me." He says, "Lo tuchal." You can't overcome me. And so it's also in verse 20, God is saying to him, God's not saying you're not allowed to. He's also not saying that you don't deserve it. He says to him, you can't handle it. You're not able.
Yeah, you don't have, as a human being, you don't have that capacity.
Meaning, but I want to protect you. Like,
Yes,
it's like you can't do it.
Yes.
It won't be good for you. You can't do it. You'll die.
Yeah,
I don't want to kill you.
Right.
You want to, it's like, I don't want to kill you.
Okay, so now we're in Kaf Aleph in 21. Vayomer Adonai, Hinei makom iti. So now God actually feels like God is not only limiting God's self, but God's being generous. Right? Here's a place with me. And you will stand on the rock. And when my glory passes by, I will place you in a cleft in the rock. Okay, so now here's our word. And I will spread my hand over you, or I shelter you with my hand, until I pass by, until after I pass by. And I will take away my hand, and you will see my back at achorai. My back, yeah. I'm just thinking about how else we might translate that. And my face you will not see, or my front you will not see. So you will see my back, or you will see like
From behind.
From behind. Yeah, nice. Thank you. Okay, so that's our.
Which is also very connected to the Jacob Esau story. Vayichar, he says, I'll be late. Arata, he says, I'm going to be late to come to Vayichar. And Jacob is also the one who comes after Esau. He's always seeing the back of Esau's head. Right? And they're wrestling. What do you see when you're wrestling somebody? You're wrestling an angel, you're seeing the back of their head. And they kissed. And there's a lot of the front and the face and the back when it comes to Esau and Jacob, like because they're twins. And so there's a kind of desire from Moshe to be God, to see God's face. And God says, you'll always be, you'll always, the maximal level of appreciation for me will be that you'll see, right, something of a similitude. You'll see something after it passes, but you won't be able to be in the direct light, as it were, in something like that. Right. So,
and the chapi, the hand, is like both a part of divinity, and we were talking about this yesterday, I was talking about this with Sharon this morning.
Yeah. It's
both a part of divinity and also a barrier, right, from divinity.
Right.
Right? It's like you can't see my face because you're going to be enveloped in my hand.
Right.
That's really intense.
It's super intense.
Like the barrier itself is made out of God.
Like something so close you can't see it. Like God.
But if you're looking beyond what's holding you, then you're missing that which is holding you is also divine.
Yeah.
Like if you're looking to see what's behind the hand, it's like, wait, I'm trying to see it. Move your hand. And no, my hand is also me.
Right.
So there's also, I just want to say one more thing about this hand business and lend a hand to this, is that the word kaf here, it's like all these things are happening in the moment, by the way. I'm just looking at this text now through the lens of what we said. The word kaf also appears. I'm sure Sharon is nodding her head now also. It also appears in the Jacob wrestling with the angel story. Because where does Jacob get hit by the angel? Dislocated.
Wow.
Right.
So you were right to look up the first instance.
Yeah, it's amazing. Right? Think about it.
It's amazing.
Think about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
The kaf here, and so, but we haven't yet shown that this is also about Sukkot. We're just talking about that these two texts clearly are connected. But the word that we underlined and that was really standing out for you, for Rabbi Koresis, it really was like blinkering to you, was this word sakoti. That as you look at source number 3 here, is you think to yourself it's covering and it has a sin, right? So it's not spelled. If you look at the Hebrew, sakoti and the word shield in verse 22, right? Sakoti, the sakoti, kapi, I will cover you with my hand. That actually is the same word as the word for schach. The sin and the samech are interchangeable, and it means to screen, to cover, to protect.
Protect, it's just protect.
Right, so it's the same root as the word for sukkah.
And Ibn Ezra, if you look at the Ibn Ezra there, source number 4, he actually says that, right? He says, "B'sin or b'samach shaveh ha'ta'am." It's like either way, whether it's with a sin, with the letters shin sin or samech, it has the same meaning, right? And then he goes on to interpret the hand as in a very allegorical way. It could mean like God covered them with a light, or God covered them with a cloud, right? But either way, the point here is that there is a kind of that God puts a sukkah, as it were, God makes a sukkah, as it were, with God's hand. And that's really intensely beautiful, just to think about its connection to this morning's reading, that there's a covering of the hand like this. The divine hand acts as a sukkah, but it acts as a protection. If you look at source number 5, which is from the translation of the Torah into Aramaic by Onkelos, he writes, "V'hi b'ma'avar yikari, when my glory will pass, v'eshavinach b'ma'arat, I will place you in a cave, again b'memri, I will cover you with my hand," which he uses the word in Aramaic for word. I will cover you with my word.
So words that conceal. It's so interesting. Right? How does a word protect Moshe from the ultimate light of God that could be right, strike him down somehow?
So here he might mean a magical word, like a divine word. He's not comfortable with God's hand. He wants to read it as an allegory, but it could also mean for us that often language is a barrier, or a kind of protection against immediacy or intimacy. That when we label something, it becomes a kind of sukkah, as it were.
Or when we're false.
Or we could also lie.
Language
that's
conceals.
Exactly.
When you put your hand over your eyes, it's just one hand can make you not see anything. So it's just like that simple little thing as a hand.
Yeah. We have a couple of hands here on Zoom and one hand in the room. So you want to do? Right. All right. Let's see. Jay and Richard have been waiting, and then Tony.
Shabbat shalom, Modim Simcha. I realized you'd run out of colors, but another sub-theme to me that emerged in that text is the importance of Shem and name. And in fact, it starts with the first text with naming. So the name Hamakom, which is also related to Jacob in the ladder and the angel story, all kinds of places. And then of course the importance of name and that whole dialogue with God. And then part of the big reveal will be God will let him know his name or their name. So that's another interesting sub-theme, the importance of naming and intimacy and in relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jay.
Really great, actually. And Hine Makom Iti, where God says Hine Makom Iti, it's like a very like V'Yakov Nasa Sukkota, King Kara Shem HaMakom, like the first place that Sukkot appears, it's being called,
right,
the name of the place
is
is called.
Such a prosaic verse, like incredibly prosaic.
It's just like,
and now we're seeing a whole different light. It's amazing.
And it actually, it speaks to like the need to label a thing, right? The need to label a place, to label a person, like language here is really crucial, because like the first verse for Sukkot also comes as an explanation for the name of the place. It has a function, right? They call the place after a thing that happened there, right? But was it like, did that have anything to do with the place itself, or like it kind of is really speaking to language as both descriptive and also as obfuscating or as random or as kind of like, and it's beautiful because
it's interesting that you use the word labeling as opposed to the need to name, which feels less.
Well, the nominal. Okay, fine. So labels, okay, the nominal, something that has to do with, the whole point of the Jacob story with Esau is that he lied about who he was. He said, my name is not my name, like I'm Esau.
Right.
And so the whole wrestling match, which was for him to find a way to claim his real name. And then as soon as he claims it, it's kind of amazing because then it becomes something else. So it's almost like he got a new name based upon a strength that was discovered, or that a capacity he had that was based on who his true essence was. He was Yisrael, and Yaakov almost fell away. But like all of that old stories about what Jay was just saying about makom and name and face, and how all of them have to do with some kind of like sukkah as the thing or sukkah as not the thing. I think that's really beautiful. Thanks, Jay.
Okay, so we have Richard, Alana, and then Tony and Iva.
Thanks. Good morning. Shabbat shalom and Chag Sameach.
Sameach.
The two of you were talking, I was thinking about the sukkah itself. So the first time when we lived in DC and had a backyard, we built a sukkah. And the first time we did it, we had to figure out what, in a sense, what the rules were. And so as I recall, there have to be 3 walls. One wall has to be open. And the top can't be solid. You have to be able to see through it in spots, as it said, as I recall right, so you can see the stars. So the sukkah itself is see, not see. You can come in, but you have to come in a certain way. In a sense, the back of the sukkah is visible, but the front is not. You have to be able to see through the top, but you can't see through it well because it's partly covered. So it's the same idea of see, not see. As you walk into the sukkah, you get the same sensibilities about what you can see and what you can't see.
Yeah, and the barrier shade itself kind of allows you to see.
Right.
Right. And the barrier is also God's presence.
Right. Right. It's fascinating. Thank you.
Exposed.
Okay, so we're going to go to Alana and then Tony and then Paul, and then I think we're going to go back to the text. So no more hands for now, but keep chatting in the chat.
And Iva.
Oh, sorry, and Iva. I did call him Iva. Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom. I'm going back to the beginning of this pasuk and thinking about the poignancy of.
Wait, Alana, can you speak more loudly? I don't know.
Sure.
Somehow your audio is low.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Better.
Yeah, so I'm going back to the beginning of the pasuk and thinking about how Moshe is in the state of disconnection, sort of loneliness and alienation from this people that he's leading. He says, I do not know them. And God, it seems, in this passage, responds to his sort of latent or unconscious need to be shielded, in the sense of being woven in. So instead of describing the people or telling him who he is leading, God shifts the focus back onto the divine as the source of sukkah or comfort. And I just love this way of understanding shield as weaving in. And so again, instead of saying to Moshe, yes, put all your desire for connection into knowing the people, instead God says, know me and let me be the source of what comforts and connects you and is your source.
So well, you start off by saying that Moshe was alienated from the people, but I think it's God that's alienated from the people. Moshe is trying to reconnect God to the people because of the sin of the golden calf. What?
But he says, you have not made known to me whom you will send with me. And I think about the story of Moshe and his being of the people and not of the people. You know, being an Egyptian, but not an Israelite. And so this position of relationship with community. I mean, that's where it sort of speaks to me at a deeper level. Yeah, like, okay, so to what degree do we receive our primary sourcing and inspiration and comfort and sense of sukkah from community? And God seems to be saying, look to me, that I am
I will provide that for you.
I will.
And once that's right between a leader and God, then it will be okay between the leader and the people.
Right. That's how you get woven in. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Okay, so I think Paul was next, and then Tony and Iva. Did I get the Tony?
I'm not sure where Paul came in, but whatever. He's been all along this one. Yeah. Have we lost them?
Paul, are you there? Oh, there he is.
In my mind is another use of the word face, which is to confront or to grapple with. And it seems to me that the divine is grappling with this Holocaust of the golden calf and is profoundly disturbed by what happened. And the opposite of Moses seeing God is God seeing Moses. And perhaps the reason that God puts his hand up is to shield itself from the gaze of Moses, because God's project has gone seriously awry, and God does not yet understand the meaning of what just happened.
So God is not yet ready for that kind of intimacy.
God doesn't know how to face it. And as a consequence, doesn't want to face Moses. And so it is shielding itself from Moses, not the other way around.
It's very powerful and interesting.
It's a complete
Reversal
on it, and it's very powerful. I think that often when later generations came to these verses, they often would say that God's ways are of course mysterious many of the times, and often we'll only understand them in retrospect. And that's kind of like the allegory of seeing the back of God's head, is that often we don't understand the meaning of something until after it's kind of over. And it's kind of a usual theological take on it, but yours is a bit more subversive and kind of in the vein of like a Richard Rubinstein or these post-Holocaust theologians who kind of say that, or maybe Rabbi Yitzhak Greenberg would say that the covenantal promise between us and God has been broken after the Holocaust, and that
how do we come back to intimacy? And what kind of intimacy do we come to? Yeah. I think it's fascinating that sin lurks in the background of both these scenes of intimacy.
Yeah.
And how does sin get in the way of intimacy, both on the human level and on the divine level? So thank you for that.
And the shame, it's almost like to think of divine shame in this moment, right? The same way that Adam and Eve, or Adam and Chava, hid when they were discovered. You're actually inviting here kind of a divine hiding of the face as a kind of embarrassment, a kind of divine hiding, as it were. Hastara, and like usually we think of that kind of anochi hastir panai, that there's a concealment of the face. That's usually the way we talk about a kind of an occulting of the divine light. But here you're reading this as God's own, reconciliation with God's own acting out, as it were. And how does God make amends? And God can't look at God averts God's own eyes from Moshe's gaze. It's very powerful.
All right, Tony and Megan, and we're going to go back to the text. As I said, Roberta, we're going to go back to do some text, and if we have time at the end, we'll come back to you.
So I'm reminded with both Paul's and also Alana's very interesting comments of the phrase, the cloud of unknowing. And
from St. John of the Cross, or
the cloud of unknowing was an anonymously written mystical text,
right?
Where what do we have without the name and without the word? What do we have but unknowing? And in this case, maybe even God's unknowing, like God is not knowing what to make of what just came down. But we've touched here on a number of occasions on the whole notion that it takes a word to create a world. That's only with the word creates the world. And without a word, there is unknowing, there is the nothingness of God / the universe. It's the Ein Sof, is it? Ein Sof. There's just that. And without the revealing and concealing of a word or a name, there's no place for us to stand. And I'm reminded of the beautiful passage, Rabbi Diane, that you repeatedly bring back to our attention, which is Rosenzweig's great description of how we stand together through the help of, and that brings so much of this together to me. How it's not God or it's the paradox of our reaching for each other only and supporting each other through the support from above. And all of that in the context of a profound unknowing, which is completely, you could claim overwhelming, you could say overwhelming, without the shield or the shelter of a word or a name or a language.
I think this is kind of like a millennia-old debate about whether or not, and especially now in postmodernity, it's a common conversation between, interestingly enough, between mystics and postmodernists or those who are in the study of ontology or being or epistemology of knowing, as whether or not, like, often you'll hear language like there's, that which goes beyond language. The Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. You see this in mystical texts in Judaism. Ein Sof is beyond language and words. But also in postmodernity, it's also not uncommon to hear people talking about that even nothingness itself is a concept that is evoked by a word, nothingness, or the experience of no word. And there are people who go in the completely opposite direction. My friend Nathaniel Berman and I've had this debate frequently about the Zohar and the language of myth, and whether or not myth is pre-unitive or post-unitive, and whether or not myth itself, the denuding of language of its ultimate, capacity to evoke a world is something that mystics miss in their, that's like, they miss it as mystics, that language actually is ontic. And that debate is a debate about, you're right, it's actually very much a part of this conversation between Moshe and God in the text. Is the world beyond form the true world, as it were? Is the world of form the true world? Are they both and, or is it neither? So all of that is kind of like a very powerful meditation abstractly, but it also comes down, it actually is it's like it has real life, efforts. It has real life, whether or not we say that the language that we use to describe a person, is that their essence? Is that just a figure of speech? Is that just, does it matter? Like, is gender a word? Is it an experience? Is biology a word? Is it an experience? All these are kind of these are conversations that are happening in real time right now.
It's so interesting to think that maybe all the ways we describe someone is actually the shields they're putting up to actually know them, because intimacy is too dangerous.
Right, and then there are
the
people,
shields we're
right.
all putting up for each other. So we think it's each other's character, but it's just the barrier.
Right, but that also, as we know, can actually run in the opposite direction, where someone says, it's a bit condescending for you to say that these quote unquote shields, these sukkot that I keep using, are not my true essence. I'm telling you they're my true essence. Are you my therapist? Are you like, when Rabbi Shir Yaakov Fait wrote this very, very intense email describing his own struggles with mental health and so on, that was a public letter that he sent out to many people in Kol Chai, and then also Romemu, because he used to be our musical director. He kind of just started talking about what it is to use labels as having validity. Like people he said that, sometimes people say that label is just a label and they want to know what's underneath, and they say, well, that's my label. That's who I am. I'm choosing to identify with that label, and I'm bringing part of my essence into that label. So be careful with your assumption about essence. Like, be careful about that. And the relation between essence, or the root of something, and its branches, or the externality, its externality and its interiority, is actually very, very complicated, right? And we have it all happening here, which is really why it's so remarkable, because it's all about Sukkot. And Sukkot is the only Jewish holiday that has the word ladat in it, meaning the scripture in the book of Leviticus and Parshat and more, where it talks about Sukkot. It says L'man yedu dorotechem ki b'Sukkot shavti b'nei Yisrael v'otzi otam me'eretz Yisrael, that there's something about knowing, yediah, knowing, which is, as Jay said, one of the words here is ladat. There's something here about what you can know and what you can't know, and how Sukkot becomes a metaphor for that. So it's very much what you're talking about, Tony. We have Ivan and then one text.
Just actually a quick thing to come back, which is on the subject of the sukkah, but also the directions, like being in front or being behind. So first, this notion of like the sukkah being both open but also closed.
Yeah.
And sheltered. But I wanted to bring in the etrog and the lulav, the directions, because we have this instruction to recognize what's above, what's below, what's behind, what's in front. And so to me, that also is in this early part of the text that we were reading, about seeing my face, like what you see, what's revealed that's in front or behind, and also what envelops one, like what envelops us and what we see. There's something in that, like what envelops us and what we see and what we don't see about that, and the need to look in all directions. So that's kind of what I was.
So I say about that we were talking about the word panim here, and panim, as I said last night in the sukkah, is in like where numerology, Jewish numerology often will also tell a deeper story. The word panim, the plural of really actually pan is one side, but really in Hebrew we say panim, it's plural, is 180. Pei nun yud mem, panim is 180. And so two panim is the full circle. Right. So it's not, it shouldn't be surprising that we use a sukkah to marry people. What's a chuppah except a sukkah, except without walls? Because we don't want walls in a marriage. Right? We want the schach, but without the walls. And so we say to them, circle one another, like we circle on Sukkot, we do the hakafot, circle one another, and you'll see that you only have one side of the story. If you want both sides, the panim and the achor, right? The 180 and then the 360, you need another person's face to be able to do it with you. And so Sukkot becomes a kind of a very beautiful, on every level, it's about relationship, about intimacy. So let's look at the source number 10. This is a Hasidic source, and Rabbi Koresis did the painstaking work of with Rabbi Sharon Ansfeld to translate this. So this is source number 10.
At the bottom of page.
Okay, so this is a Hasidic text on chapter 33, verse 22, on the verse that we're talking about. It will be when I will avor kvodi, when I will bring my kavod, my glory, or my thickness, my gravitas, my holiness, my inscrutable essence will be avor, it'll be passed before you. I will place you benikrat sur. I'll place you in this cleft of a sur, a rock. And I will cover, my hand will cover you, my hand will succor you until I pass. And then vasiroti kapireti dacharai panel. So he quotes these verses, and I will then remove my hand, my palm. You will see my achorai, my back, but my face, lo yira'u, will not be seen. He says, he says, I want to preface this, as it were, preface this with this, what the Maggid of Koznitz, the Koznitzer Maggid said, the righteous man memory be for a blessing. So this Hasidic teacher will quote the holy Maggid of Koznitz and say, and bring to us the teaching of the Maggid of Koznitz, which itself is based upon the Talmud in Masechet Sanhedrin 103, where in Masechet Sanhedrin, the rabbis there are talking about people who did really horrible things. They're really, really horrible things. And whether or not it's possible for those people to do tshuva, whether it's possible for those people who did really horrible things to receive some version of divine forgiveness. And the Talmud there says that there was one particular person who was so committed to repairing what he had broken that God, as it were, made a tunnel, right? Made an open, chatar chatira means created, he dug a tunnel underneath the kisei kavod, underneath the throne of glory for that person to be able to come back to the divine. Like a tunnel was built, like an escape tunnel, like going out of a prison. They dug out, God said, I'm going to dig out a tunnel for you to come, and you'll come out right underneath my kisei kavod, my throne of glory, which of course is connected to kavod. You see there's kavod here and the kavod of the text in Exodus, where God says, I will pass my kavod. And here there's a throne of kavod. So he says, the Koznitzer Maggid said, V'choter tachas kavodo lekabel b'tshuva ad kan dvarav hakadosh. So the Yismach Moshe quotes the Kosher Magid, who says very cryptically that God, as it were, everything in this language is very anthropomorphic and very like human, but he says, as it were, God is mochel al kvodo. It's a great phrase. This rabbinic phrase means to forgive your honor. Literally means, right, forgiveness. Mochel, the same word used for when you forgive somebody's offense. But if somebody says, listen, even though I'm the president of the United States, I'm mochel on my kavod. That means that, like, I'll treat me like a regular Joe, so to speak. Because I am a regular Joe, I'm Joe Biden. But if you're mochel on kavod, it means don't treat me like the station deserves. Treat me as if my honor is not, is not available. So the Kosher Magid says that God, as it were, says, I'm going to be mochel on my kavod and receive you back b'tshuva in glory. Like I'm like my kavod. What does that mean? So he says, the Yismach Moshe says, "V'nei apashut gam kin emes." Ki abal tshuva b'atchalato kodem shenirtzeh tshuvaso v'hazdonos nasa zechuyus hu musukan ma'od shelo yifgeu bo hamikatrikim hamazikim u'befrat shel elu shenivru b'psha'av. He says that the simple meaning of this is also true, which is that a person that is trying to fix their life has so much. There's so much surrounding them, right? That they, before they do repentance, there's so many things that they've done wrong that it could damage them. The very, it's almost like the very things that the person is trying to fix. There's a sense in the beginning of your journey home or a journey towards forgiveness or compassionate resolution. There's a sense that the things that you did wrong are mikatrikim, they're prosecutors or they're instigators. Could be your own thoughts, your own sense of like, I can never do this. Whatever it is, there's a certain, in the beginning, he says, you need some kind of protection. And so God, as it were, here's where it gets really amazing. He says, "Akadosh Baruch Hu sokechala be'ivaro, u'mechaseu b'chatira shetachat kisei kvodo." So he says that the Holy One of Blessing covers that person, sokech alav. It's the word from Sukkah, covers them with God's limbs and covers them in the tunnel that is beneath, right, the throne of glory. Pirsam alav ananot. God covers them in the cloud of glory. Hainu masach hamavdil. God creates a barrier, right, as it were, some kind of protective shield, an umbrella, something, because of the intensity of the awareness of those things that might obstruct the person from completing the task of tshuva. Right? God, as it were, does gracefully allows the person to be covered in divine grace to allow them to continue their journey, right, and not be obstructed by the very things that would naturally obstruct them from continuing forward. A sense of wherever it might,
otherwise sin would serve as a barrier.
Otherwise, the sin would serve as a barrier, or the sin itself would be right. Would be
Instead of the barrier, God replaces God's protection with the barrier.
God's protection protects them from the barrier that would otherwise, right, and actually almost covers them in almost an amniotic sack of divine grace, and says, like, there are all these kind of toxins that you created. For those toxins, I want to protect you from those toxins. So I'll give you kind of seeing this hand, as it were, as God's, loving presence.
Because without that, how do you make tshuva? Because all those voices are in the way.
All those voices would get in the way. All those karmic voices would get in the way. And he says, so keep going a little bit here. All right, yeah. He says, now if you look at this, where it says V'hainu, after this, where it's the parentheses there on the right side, it's V'hainu, shemidaber leba'al tshuva. It's as if in the verse in Exodus 33:22, God is speaking now to the repentant person. He says, V'aya ba'avor kivodi. When it says, I will pass my glory before you, it means, Ritzono lamar kish'avir al kvodi. Right, if you can go a little bit further down on the right side, all right. He says this is a radical rereading of what we're going to read this morning. When we read that God says, I will pass my glory before you, right? I will pass my kavod. God is saying in the language of the Kosher Magid that, that the kavod that I have, that I'm God, that everything is before me and I know everything that you did. And in some way, it was an affront to my presence. So the things that he did that were an affront to the divine presence, I'm being mochel on my kavod. I'll pass my kavod. Like for your sake, because I love you so much, forget that I'm God. I'm going to protect you. I'm not coming in judgment. I'm coming in love, right? V'akabel otcha, and I receive you, right? So that's what it means. Like I'm going to place you in that place, and the separating screen will be the screen of love. All this other stuff is beautiful, but it's not like what so here, V'sakoti means I will protect you for the sake of the intimacy. We can stop the screen share, it's okay. For Sakoti, the sukkah here is a protective against the glare of the divine light, that in the presence of the divine light, I might see all of the things that I did wrong. Like when light comes into a room, all of a sudden you see all the dust particles that are there. Mm-hmm. And in some way, the sukkah is not allowing that much light in because I want to protect you from all of that self-consciousness and that judgment that might arise for the sake of your continuing your journey towards forgiveness and for the sake of your continuing the possibility of rapprochement.
The sukkah is the structure that protects us from ourselves.
The sukkah is the structure that protects us from ourselves, so at least we can see the back of God's head.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, we had Roberta waiting from before, with Elliot in the room, and we have Barbara on screen. I don't know how much time we have. So, 2 minutes. 9:44. We'll go to 9:50. Okay, so Roberta was waiting from before. Roberta.
Thank you. I'm just the image of God, Yud-Heh Vav-Heh, sukkahing us is just sitting with that. And I forget which Hasidic teacher, the chant, Mamale Kolo Min V'Sover. You remember that? You know that, David, we used to do that at Bat Chaim, and that when you're in the sukkah, it's the opportunity to experience, right, presence above you, and just the image of this hand. And it kind of flips how I've looked at the sukkah. Well, I've been having this experience all week. I think when I first started sitting in a sukkah, which was as an adult, I'm not exactly sure why in my extremely Jewish neighborhood, we really didn't do much for Sukkot. I don't understand why exactly. My theory is that the New York City Teachers Union was exhausted by then from all the Jewish holidays. And so we just went back to school. But I've been really having, instead of seeing the sukkah as like this spiritual warriorship where we're going to go out and experience, being unsheltered and, in this impermanent, in this like scary vulnerability, that it's actually this magnificent vulnerability coming out of the work we've been doing, through Elul and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, that it's this opportunity to actually experience being sheltered by God. And I feel like that's what this source sheet has brought us, and this teaching. And I'm just,
beautiful,
wow. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Elliot and then Barbara.
Yeah, so just want to try to bring together three things. And I have to ask you, Rabbi David, you mentioned something at the high holiday service about something you always keep in mind about take more lightly that which is sort of more intellectual and put more weight on that which is more about connection. What can you
There's from my friend Rabbi Adam Kliekfeld,
yeah.
a sermon this year called "Hold Your Ideas Lightly So You Can Hold Others Closely."
Right. So to me, okay, that has everything to do with, like I'll give up my glory for love.
Yeah.
Okay, and
that's it. Yeah.
I'll give up my ideology.
Yeah.
And also, I'll be willing not to be God for a minute. So it's like in that way,
yeah.
right? So
right. And that's two. The third is, but you cannot see my face, or a human being may not see my face and live. So God isn't saying that a human being can't see God's face. He's saying, you can't see my face and live. So life is more important. The emphasis on life, that you may live. Okay, so that to me is all the connection, the life, the living, more important, okay, than the seeing, the ideology, and the glory.
So giving up some knowing for the sake of the relationship.
Yeah.
Which is complicated, because knowing is what makes the relationship possible.
Yeah, but knowing to a point.
Yeah.
Because I forget where it is, but in one of the prayers, God is unsearchable.
Interesting.
It's also like, I think that I've quoted this before. There's like an amazing, I remember it was a poem by Edna, I can't remember exactly. I read it like 20 years ago, but it was about like intimacy being about permission giving and not about force. And like that when we tread lightly on the inscrutable essence of the divine and say, because Moshe is in a place of radical request vis-a-vis God. And he's begging basically, and God's saying, well, there are things that I just don't want to show you, right? And it could be like, there's a certain concealment also with the Bedekin ceremony, which is also very connected to Jacob and Sukkot and the wedding. It's like there's certain things that take time before I'm willing to let you know. And I'm also like, there's maybe some things that you don't need that I can't ever share with you. And there's a certain level of intimacy that will destroy our relationship. There's a certain familiarity that will actually, the distance is actually vital for there to be some possibility of intimacy. Intimacy actually is not identification. And there's a certain intimacy that's a kind of, there will always be something that you can't know. And that's a vital part of intimacy, a vital part of the divine human intimacy. There are some people in our tradition who didn't go to this unio mystica place where God is, we're one with God, because they said, Judaism is about relationship, and we want to always maintain the absolute distinction between the divine and the human. And that also is true with human beings. Like there are things that, no matter how close we get, that hopefully you'll still never know. Hopefully.
I think about this in teaching Torah, especially giving sermons, because I often reveal, like I tell a story about my own life. But my question is always, what piece of information will facilitate connection, and what piece of information will sort of disrupt connection with the community?
Right.
Like what, so not all pieces, we could talk about that later. Not all pieces of information, right, facilitate connection.
Right. Also, just to respond to what you're saying, like, yes, maybe we don't want even those we're most intimate with to know everything about us, but even if we did,